Last week, Mary Louise Kelly taught us, and wisdom and freedom and healing, she said, arise when we release the views and beliefs that mistakenly have us imagine that we are separate from one another. Wisdom and freedom and healing. When we release the views and beliefs that mistakenly have us imagine that we are separate from one another. So I just loved that and wanted to continue along those lines. And maybe this week to extend it a little bit, to consider maybe people who are difficult, or maybe even people we might consider our enemies. So only love is real. Only love is real. Only love is real. How does that work? Part of my motivation also was, like many of you, I've been deeply engaged in reading the book Caste. It's just a really, I think it's the best book on racism I've read. It's a profound and powerful look at many of our cultural misperceptions, mistaken perceptions of some beings as superior and others as inferior. And Isabel Wilkerson talks about how humanity wants an underdog. She gives a lot of examples throughout history of an in-group and an out-group, people on top, people beneath. And if people don't stay beneath, they can be violently persecuted. And she makes really very powerful and eloquent discussions of all of that. One concern would be a little bit strong, but as I was reading the book, I thought just how much it is like some of the Buddhist teachings. And the subtitle of her book is The Origins of Our Discontents. And, it seemed to me that she was saying, the origins of our discontents are sort of these, ideas that people have or cultures have. And, we could just change them if we wanted to, or more likely they could just change them if they wanted to, or could have changed them if they wanted to. And I think it got me thinking about the origins of our discontent, or the origins of our separation, and the Buddhist teachings about the origins of our separation. And the Dalai Lama, you've heard us say so many times, the Dalai Lama says, all of our difficulties result from mistaken perception. All of our difficulties result from mistaken perception. And Kalu Rinpoche says, we live in illusion in the appearance of things. So we live kind of in a dream. We live in illusion and the appearance of things. We could easily translate this thought as Isabel sometimes seems to, like, some people have mistaken perceptions, or those other people with whom we disagree live in illusion. But actually, that's really not the Buddhist teachings. The Buddhist teachings are that we live in illusion and the appearance of things. We live in illusion in the appearance of things. It's what the Buddha calls conceit. I'll speak to the meaning of that word in a minute, but the conceit about ourselves and our own being. The full quote from Kalu Rinpoche is, we live in illusion and the appearance of things. There is a reality. There is a reality. We are that reality. We are that reality. When you understand this, you see that you are nothing, and being nothing, you are everything. That is all. It's like, really? What? What does that mean? And how does that work in our, current modern daily lives? To really kind of practice living in the illusion and the appearance of things. There is a reality. We are that reality. When you understand this, you see that you are nothing. And being nothing, you are everything. That is all. I'm kind of hopeful that as I talk, your mind will kind of begin to raise some questions or some uneasiness about this teaching, and maybe I hope we'll have a little time at the end to talk about it. I wanted to give an example. My husband and I like to do jigsaw puzzles. And Judy, I'm going to use the photo in just a minute so you can get that queued up. My husband and I like to do jigsaw puzzles when we're down at the ocean. And what we usually do is we dump a big bunch of 1,000 or 200,000 or 2,000, not 200,000, 2,000 pieces on the table. And then we set about sorting them into something that the box cover tells us it should look like. Easy enough. And our human beingness, there's a metaphor, you can use that as kind of a metaphor, an analogy. Our human beingness is kind of like that. Neuroscientists tell us that we have 86 billion neurons processing information in our body and in our brain right now, right this minute. 86 billion pieces of information. So try that. Dump 86 billion bits of information on your dining room table. And with those, the challenge is keep your body and mind functioning efficiently, both inside and out, with everything, even the pieces themselves, constantly changing. How does that work? And as we develop as human beings, from babies to children to teenagers to adults to old people, the cover of the box is the accumulation of views that our parents and our culture for eons have cultivated as the picture of reality to which it invites us to conform. And Mary Louise talked about that last week, about the conditioning, that we then kind of arrange all those billions of neurons into this picture that we've been taught. It's sort of like the cover of the box. It's like our parent says, oh, that's a doggy. So that bunch of neurons, that bunch of information gets articulated in our minds and perceived as as a thing that's out there and it's separate from me. But what we forget is that all of those forms, just like the puzzle on my dining room table down at the beach, all of those forms are constructed. They are indeed important and functional. We would be hard-pressed to navigate daily life without the constructions. But we forget that they're just constructions. They're not reality. It's not truth. It's not even who we are. They enable us to get out of bed in the morning and find our shoes and assess what are good things to eat for breakfast and where we left the car keys, and for that matter, what is a car and what it's used for. So I found this photo, and maybe Judy, if you would post that photo for us. I just happened across it last week. It's on the, this is the cover of the Orion magazine this month, which is, by the way, is a wonderful environmental magazine. if you're not familiar with it. But this is the cover, and I just thought it was so perfect about how we use those neurons, we use those puzzle pieces, if you will, to construct something. And then we take our hand, if you will, and our mind, and we kind of hold it up, um, and we think that's who we are. And then we compare ourselves to the other clouds, if you will, in the sky. And we say, well, my cloud's bigger. And actually, my cloud is whiter, although yours doesn't have all those little holes in it. So maybe yours is better. Um, and maybe yours is kind of more round. I wonder if maybe a rounder cloud is a better kind of cloud to have, you know. And so we get preoccupied with the clouds, if you will, the forms, the self that gets constructed. But we forget that it's a construction and that there's a whole sky back there. There's a whole sky back there that just is open and spacious and loving and forgiving and the ground of our being. And it's not just the ground of your being or my being, it is the ground of being. And it is fundamentally who we are beneath, beyond all those clouds, all those forms that we take to be so real. So again, Kalu Rinpoche's quote, we live in illusion and the appearance of things. There is a reality. The reality is that the only thing that is real, that is unchanging, that is not constructed is love. There is a reality. We are that reality. We don't have to fix ourselves. We don't have to make the cloud nice and round. We don't have to make it whiter. We don't have to fill in the holes. We don't have to make it last. We don't have to do anything to be that reality. Sometimes I think we can misunderstand the loving kindness practice as something that we have to somehow cultivate, that we have to sort of dump it into either ourselves or one another. But actually, the loving kindness practice is simply a practice of connecting with the ground of our being and remembering. It's just a matter of remembering. Maybe I guess maybe close out the image, Judy. So our loving kindness practice is a practice for all beings everywhere, in the sense it is in that it is a practice of remembering not only who I am, that my being is precious, but that all beings everywhere are precious. And the Buddha talks about the conceit that is sort of the idea, the perception that I exist and I'm separate from others and maybe I'm better than. There's also, he also says it's equally unskillful to imagine that I'm not as good as. That there is some form, there is some quality of form that is somehow more valuable, more important, more significant than the ground of our being. I want to pause here for a second because if you're following this, your mind may begin um, to raise some questions about it. This sort of, what about? Yes, but what about? So I'd like you to consider the questions that your mind has. Ajahn Chah says, you have to think about all of this slowly or your head will explode. So we don't want any heads to explode. What about, any thoughts? Let me just come back to you. Any whatabouts? Okay, all beings are precious. Love is the ground of every single being. Any whatabouts that you can think of? If you want to put them in the chat box or you want to say them. Anything that you're wondering about? I can give you one. I read the other day that Bashar al-Assad had COVID. My very first thought was not, may your being be precious, be considered precious. May you be healthy and well. It was not my first thought. What about Bashar al-Assad? I want to tell you a story. Let's see where I am. Oh, I wanted to tell you too, you may be interested in this. Analio has a new book, a brand new book, just out and just barely a month old. And the title is Superiority, Conceit in Our Buddhist Traditions. And he goes through 4 different kinds of Buddhist conceit of superiority, and basically debunks them. And let me just see what they are here. Let me go back to it. One is the sort of tradition in many Buddhist cultures that to be a male monastic or you have to be born in a male body in order to achieve enlightenment. And he says that's a conceit that was not something the Buddha taught. It's a conceit that was developed by people who needed to think of a certain form as being better than another form. He talks about the conceit of that those who intend to become future Buddhas, who have a better, who have like a higher aspiration, look down on those not aspiring to Buddhahood. He talks about the conceit of Theravadan Buddhists, that would be us, to look down on others as deviant from the original true teaching. So Theravada teachings are better. Sometimes we hear Mahayana teachings are better. Or for secular Buddhists to look down on traditional Buddhists as stagnant dogmatists caught up in rituals who lack a proper understanding of the teachings of the historical Buddha. And I must confess, when I was in China, that was exactly what I thought when I, was going to many of the temples there. I was, a little bit snobby about how they didn't really fully understand Buddhism the way we did in the West because they weren't practicing in the same way. And I rather suspect, Liz, that when you talk about Asian Americans, we'll be addressing that some as well, because there's a bit of a snobbishness even in our Western culture around what kind of Buddhism is the proper one. There even can be some snobbishness around what kind of meditation, how long you meditate, just all of those. It's like they're all conceits, the Buddha would say. They're all conceits. We live in illusion and the appearance of things. What matters is the extent to which we know the ground of our being and dwell there. I want to tell you a little bit of a story that you can listen to it and maybe hear some conceits of my own as I tell you the story. A number of years ago, before COVID, I went to a funeral in a very tiny little town in the mountains of North Carolina. And I wasn't exactly looking forward to this funeral. It was a person who had been pretty challenging. He became a bit of a curmudgeon and hermit over time, irritable, crusty, opinionated about classes and races and sexes, constantly in conflict with the government and with basically anybody who wasn't him, which was pretty much everybody. And I had long learned to keep a bit of a distance from this person. And so I'm going to the funeral and I'm thinking it might be a little hard to offer a eulogy for this guy. And I just, when I was doing the getting the talk ready, I looked up what not to include in a eulogy. Faults and shortcomings, old hurts, grudges, past arguments or disagreements, okay, family rifts, yeah, check. Bad memories, yeah, check. Unhealthy rivalries, crimes, oh, that one too, we could check that one. Poor treatment of others, poor decisions, and emotional baggage. Okay, don't include any of that in the eulogy. And so, so I'm going to this funeral, and I'm thinking, what is this eulogy going to be like? And maybe you could think of someone either in your family or maybe even a public figure for whom it might be difficult. If somebody called you up and said, that politician, you are the perfect person to offer a eulogy for that politician. Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to, but don't include any of those things, So I'm going to this funeral and I'm like, okay. Furthermore, I'm going to this little teeny church in this little teeny town in this little teeny big hill of North Carolina, So already my mind is like forming all kinds of perceptions and illusions about what's going to happen at this service. Well, so I go to the funeral, and it was the best eulogy I have ever heard in my entire life. Because what this pastor, this little country preacher did was he stood up and he said, well, we all know that this guy could be kind of challenging. We all know that. And I do too. I used to visit him all the time. Now, how he got to visit him, I have no idea, because I will guarantee you that this person did not go to church. Anyway, he says, I used to visit him all the time. And he was generally pretty challenging and disagreeable and crusty and irritable and dismissive and annoying the whole time. But I kept going. And after a while, the guy got really annoyed with me. And he said, why are you bothering me? Why are you here? Just go away, stop. What do you want? What do you want from me? And the pastor said to him, as he did to all of us sitting there, he said, I want nothing. I just love you. I want nothing. I just love you. And he went on to say that over time, this man was able to take him in and to touch into the ground of his own being before he died. Probably for the very first time in his life. I want nothing. I just love you. And he wanted us to know that, and it was hugely comforting. He just wanted us to know that he had been loved and had felt loved before he died. So he sure taught me a lesson about a number of illusions that I had carried to that funeral with me. And I went up to him afterwards and just thanked him and said thank you. And he was sort of a little chagrined because he really kind of didn't know what I was talking about exactly. It was so ordinary for him to be living and loving and preaching and acting in that way, that it was really nothing special. There was nothing unusual and nothing special. That he was living in that ground, he was living in the sky, and didn't get preoccupied. He didn't get distracted by the clouds. He didn't get overcome. He didn't get preoccupied with the illusion that, we had to fix the clouds somehow. That he says, I want nothing. I just love you. So this is Anelio again in his book. He says, instead of appropriating the historical Buddha to authenticate one's personal or group beliefs, the true seal of authentication for any Buddhist practitioner can be found by putting into practice the central discovery of the historical Buddha, emptiness or not self. Now, he said, and then he goes on, he says, it is by diminishing ego, letting go of arrogance, and abandoning conceit that one becomes a better Buddhist, no matter what tradition one may follow. Sharon Salzberg tells a story about an Indian teacher. She doesn't say who it is, but she says an Indian teacher came to the United States and was generally pretty impressed with the sincerity of the Western students in practice. But then he said, there's one problem. He says, you guys are like rowing madly in your studies and in your meditation practice, but you've left the boat tied to the dock. And what he was saying was, you're missing this point, You're just missing the ground. You're missing the importance of cultivating. We don't have to cultivate the ground. It's there. We don't have to put loving kindness into ourselves. We have to remember it. So that the cultivation is in the remembering, not in the doing. He says, just you can let go of, holding on to the dock. Again, Ajahn Chah says you have to think about this slowly or your head will explode. But I love it that all of our difficulties result from mistaken perception. I find that truly reassuring. Mary Louise spoke of it last week. We practice, we cultivate love, not to create it in our own minds and hearts, but to see the blocks, and to slowly and in time to release those blocks so that we can better see and dwell in and manifest the light of infinite love. Only love is real. Everything else is illusion. And I'm just going to invite you to not think about this too hard, but to let your heart be touched. That is the sky knowing itself. The sky knows itself. It recognizes itself. So thank you, Mary Louise. It was so dear of you to be willing to do this.
Sure. I I'll lead us in this metta chant that I learned from Tueri Sala, a teacher out of Seattle. And I welcome you to sing along. You probably want to have your mic on mute because Zoom doesn't do very well with many of us singing together. And I'll just lead us in this chant. And we'll do our metta chant for I, then you, then they, then we. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. May they be filled with loving kindness. May they be well. May they be peaceful and at ease. May they be happy. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be happy.
Thank you.